Hello, you're watching World Talks on TVP World. My name is Sasha Fahrbach. Hungary has woken up to a political earthquake after preliminary results show a decisive victory for Péter Magyar's tisza party, ending 16 years of rule by Viktor Orbán. Now, with projections putting tisza at around 138 seats to Fidesz's 55, the result signals a sweeping realignment across both urban and rural constituencies. We now break down with the map, the turnout, and the demographics reveal with Màtyàs Bòdi, an electoral geography expert at ELTE University. Good to have you with us.
Hey, good morning.
All right, so when we were looking at this before the election, it did seem that tisza was ahead, but this kind of landslide, explain to us, I think, even Orbán probably was surprised at this, but why was, let's say, the projection, the idea so much different from the reality that we saw last night?
Because freely dig its own grave with this electoral system. So you need to understand that in 2010, when Fidesz and Viktor Orbán came into power with a constitutional majority, they made a profound reform in the electoral system. So they constructed this electoral system in which if there is a very big dominant party, it's quite easy to win a constitutional majority, because the majority of the MEPs are directly elected in single constituencies in the first past the post one-round system. So actually, this is what actually backfired for Fidesz party last night. So even tisza wins the 53% or 54% of the popular votes, they were able to gain supermajority in the Hungarian parliament.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and looking also at past elections, traditionally also it was pretty much everywhere, but especially the countryside where Viktor Orbán's party used to be strong. So tell us what happened there and a little bit more about the rural vote, how that went.
Yes, so Viktor Orbán's party were extremely popular in the countryside and in very rural areas, which is a very typical use case for parties that are loyal to Viktor Orbán. These new right populist movements are traditionally much stronger in countryside and in rural places where there are a bigger number of a little bit least educated and least income level voters. But this is actually what has been changed last night in case of Hungary. And the question is why. So actually, Péter Magyar, the opposition leader, physically went to visit all of these places, all of these very rural constituencies. The whole opposition campaign was built on the top of the idea of personal interactions. So actually, he said that he literally shook the hands of hundreds of thousands of people. So actually, he physically visited on these campaign rallies all these very rural, very countryside type of constituencies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's also what we've been hearing from experts, that he was very much present everywhere. He was a voice to be seen. One of those commentators told us everywhere, just he was present, making that case across the country. I want to just show that map right now. We're showing to our viewers. You can see tisza, that's in blue. That's Péter Magyar there. And if you just look at the map, I mean, it's pretty much covered in the result of what tisza is here. Very few Fidesz districts. Walk us through a little bit here, your expertise, what you can tell here, and how significant that turnout was as well. I think we had very high historic turnout yesterday, didn't we?
So this was a historical election. We have never seen, we never observed such a high turnout in Hungarian history, and therefore there was no any single party in the Hungarian history that has been voted with as many votes as tisza got yesterday. Tisza received more than 3.2 million nationalist votes, which is an absolute record in the Hungarian history. Mm-hmm. One more thing to this map. So the situation is going to be even worse for Fidesz, because we still have a few votes to be counted, because we also have distant voters. So typically, for instance, university students that are studying in Budapest, but they have the permanent address somewhere in the countryside, but they can vote from Budapest, but they need to, the authorities need to send their ballot paper back to their hometown, and this is where it's going to be counted in these days. So the final results is going to be announced somewhere in Friday or Saturday, but you also need to know that these distant voters, because they are mainly university students, those are typically predominantly tisza opposition voters. So I think, based on my calculation, 2 or 3 additional constituencies will swing from Fidesz to tisza.
All right. And also, you mentioned these postal voters as well. I mean, we're still getting information. Tell us about also the role, if you can, about the diaspora, those Hungarians abroad in different countries. Where, if we can, get those results, and tell us how they ended up voting.
So we have 2 types of, let's say, diaspora voters. Because of the 20th century of the country, we have a very big national minority, Hungarian national communities everywhere in the neighboring countries, especially in Romania or Serbia or in Slovakia. So those people are actually entitled to vote only to the party list, but not for candidates, and they can vote by mail. Those voters are predominantly Fidesz voters. But as I said, they cannot vote for individual candidates. So maybe this is something that can gain an extra Fidesz mandate, but not more. The other type of diaspora people are the people that were born in Hungary, but they moved to somewhere, typically to Germany or to the United Kingdom or to the Netherlands. Those people can vote for individual candidates as well. And contrary to the ethnic minority Hungarians in Romania and Serbia, those Western European diaspora Hungarians are predominantly opposition tisza supporters.
And also tell a little bit more, Màtyàs, about the youth vote. I mean, if we're looking at turnout almost 80%, was it critical here that it was more young people voting for tisza? Was it a combination, the elderly also switching sides? Was it both? Tell us a bit how the generational area here also voted.
We haven't seen in history such a huge generational cleavage, such a huge generational gap in an election. Based on the recent polls, in the generation that are older than 65, so typically the retired generation, Fidesz had 2 times more supporters than the opposition. But in the generation that are younger than 40, tisza had 3 or 4 times more than Fidesz. So this was a kind of tension in every Hungarian family. The grandparents were always predominantly Fidesz supporters, while the child or grandchildren were always supporting tisza. So it's actually a huge cleavage in almost in every Hungarian family, which is a very interesting phenomenon. But yes, the tisza supporters are predominantly much younger than the Fidesz supporters. And also we need to mention that the young generation were typically not that engaged with politics so far, but this has been changed radically since Péter Magyar showed up in the political landscape of Hungary.
And tell us a little bit more also about mobilization. I mean, this also was key. I mean, you mentioned already Péter Magyar was present across the country, but where do you see where like mobilization of voters had the greatest impact? Was it more in the countryside? Was it everywhere? Tell us how people organized.
Yeah, so we have seen almost 10 percentage point increase in turnout compared to the last election. That's why, as I said, we had a record turnout. Almost every settlement type observed a huge turnout increase. Almost in every kind of Hungarian settlement, a lot of new voters showed up, but predominantly that kind of increase was much higher in major cities, but not in Budapest, but mostly in county centers or major Hungarian cities on the countryside. And we have seen this during the daily turnout reports during the day yesterday, and this was already a very negative signal for the Fidesz campaign. And what we see that the new voters were coming from major cities and not from the countryside, not as much in major cities, and that was also one of the key factors of the tisza campaign.
And as we know that tisza won across the board landslide, but even on those districts where Fidesz actually won, how close was that call between Fidesz and tisza in those districts where Orbán still managed to hang on?
Yes, Budapest is a very, it's a huge metropolitan, very cosmopolitan city. Typically, not a good place for Fidesz politicization, and that's why Fidesz had to deserve the greatest defeat in Budapest, but also in the surrounding counties or surrounding constituencies in the commuter belt area of Budapest, but also in major cities, where the average income and average education level of the Hungarians are much higher than in much more distant places. But actually, Péter Magyar was very successful in very rural, very scatterly populated places as well. Its victory was not that high as in Budapest, but they were able to mobilize more voters in rural places as well.
Yeah, so really fascinating stuff. On this historic day, 16 years of Viktor Orbán now out of power with this new change in Hungary. It'll be watched not just here in Europe, but across the world. Look, thanks so much for breaking down that information. Màtyàs Bòdi, electoral geography expert at ELTE University. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching World Talks. We'll stay right here on TVP World for news and commentary. Goodbye.